My name is Diane Sorrells. I am 41 years old. On March 14th, 2024, at approximately 9:20 in the evening, I found my 73-year-old mother standing in the rain outside a Comfort Lodge motel in Branton, Arkansas, holding a plastic bag with her prescription medication and a nightgown, because my brother had driven her there, dropped her off, and left. The motel had been closed since November. The total value of assets my brother had extracted from my mother's accounts over the preceding 31 months was $214,600. I know this because I counted every dollar myself. When I pulled into that parking lot, my headlights hit the building first. Plywood over the lobby windows, a rusted chain on the front door. Then they hit my mother. She was standing under the overhang where the check-in canopy used to be, and her shoes were wrong. She was wearing house slippers. The kind with no backs. On wet concrete, in 41-degree rain, with no coat. And she was holding that plastic bag against her chest like it was a child. I got out of the car. I did not run. I walked to her, and I took the bag from her hands, and I put my palm against her cheek, because that is how you assess temperature on skin without a thermometer, when you do not have your equipment. Her cheek was 58 degrees at most. Her lips were gray. She said, "Gary said they'd have a room." I stood there with my hand against my mother's face, rain running down the back of my shirt, and something in me went perfectly still, not calm. Still, the way a scale goes still when you stop adding weight and start reading the number. I was already reading the number. I had been reading it for months without admitting what it said. "Noted," I said. She could not hear what I meant by that. She heard her daughter being quiet. What she could not hear was the fact that I had already logged the first two incidents. This was the third, and 3 points make a line. Before I lay out what I found, and what it cost my brother when I did, I want to know something. What time is it where you are? I have learned to note the time of things. It matters more than people realize. I am a catastrophe risk modeler. I have been one for 17 years. I work for an insurance consortium based in Little Rock. My job is to take a disaster that has already happened, or one that might happen, and calculate exactly what it will cost. Flood damage, structural failure, collapsed infrastructure. I look at what broke, when it broke, where the stress was distributed, and I determine the dollar value of what was lost and what must be rebuilt. I deal in probabilities and actuarial tables and damage assessments that run 40 pages and carry seven-figure consequences. That skill had quantified the aftermath of 219 catastrophic events over my career. It was about to quantify what had happened inside my own family. I grew up in Fort Smith, Arkansas, the younger of two children. My brother Gary is 4 years older. Our father, Don Sorrells, died of a heart attack in 2003 when I was 20. Our mother, Vivian, never remarried. She lived alone in the house on Darrow Lane, the same house we grew up in, paid off in 1998. After Dad died, Gary moved back to Fort Smith and rented a house 11 minutes from Mom. I moved to Little Rock for graduate school and stayed. I visited every other weekend. I called every Tuesday and Friday. I sent a check every month. $500, later $750, later $1,000, for 20 years. Gary did not send checks. Gary did not need to. Gary was present. That was the family math. I was the one who left, so I paid in money. Gary was the one who stayed, so he paid in time. Mom said this often enough that it became a law no one questioned. What I did not know, because I was not there to see it, was that Gary's version of staying was costing my mother more than my leaving ever had. The first documented incident was in September of 2021. Mom mentioned on the phone that Gary had helped her reorganize her finances. She said it casually, the way you describe someone helping you clean out a closet. I asked what that meant. She said Gary had been added to her primary checking account at First Regional Bank so he could help with bills. I asked if he had been added as a signer or as a joint holder. She did not know the difference. I made a note of the date and moved on. The second incident was in April of 2022. Mom said she needed a new roof. She said Gary had found a contractor. The estimate was $32,000. I said that was high for a 600-square-foot single story in Fort Smith. She said Gary had handled it. I asked for the contractor's name. She said she did not remember. I asked for the invoice. She said Gary had it. I sent my mother $8,000 toward the roof because she asked. I called Gary. He said the contractor's been paid, don't worry about it. His voice was the voice of a man sorting a small administrative matter. Not defensive, not grateful, just managing a file. The irony was that I had spent 17 years calculating exactly how much damage an event would cause, determining who was liable, and quantifying loss to the penny, and I could not bring myself to run those same calculations on my own brother, because doing so would have meant admitting that my mother's house was not a home, it was a loss event in progress. The third incident was the motel, March 14, 2024. I got the call at 6:47 on a Tuesday evening. Not from my mother, from a number I did not recognize, a woman named Teresa who worked at the Dollar General on Route 71 in Branton. She said an elderly woman had come in asking to use the phone but could not remember any numbers except mine, which was written on a piece of paper in her plastic bag. She said the woman was wet and confused and mentioned a motel. I was in Little Rock. Branton is 180 miles from Little Rock. The roads between Little Rock and Branton were partially flooded from 3 days of storms. I drove it in 3 hours and 14 minutes. When I found my mother under that canopy, I did two things. I put her in my car with the heat on 90, and I called Gary. He answered on the second ring. I said, "Mom is standing outside a closed motel in Branton in the rain. Why?" He said, "She wanted to visit Aunt Rena. I dropped her off at the motel so she could stay overnight and go in the morning." I said, "The motel has been closed since November." He said, "That's not my fault. I checked their website." I said, "Aunt Rena lives in Texarkana. Branton is 60 miles from Texarkana and in the wrong direction." There was a pause. Then he said, "Diane, I've been managing everything by myself for years. If I made a mistake, I made a mistake. You don't get to show up once a month and criticize." I was holding the steering wheel with both hands, and the rain was hitting the windshield so hard the wipers could not keep up, and something inside my body went to the place where I go when I am sitting in front of a damage assessment that is about to go from 5 figures to 7. The place where you stop feeling and start modeling. I was already building a timeline. I could feel the columns forming behind my eyes. I took my mother to the emergency room in Branton. Hypothermia, early stage, dehydration, disorientation consistent with acute stress in an elderly patient with early cognitive decline. I sat in the waiting room while they stabilized her and I opened my laptop. Then I found something else. I had remote access to my mother's first regional bank account because she had given me view-only access in 2019 when I set up her online bill pay. I had not looked at it in over a year. I looked at it now. The checking account balance was $1,411.06. 14 months earlier, after the sale of my father's workshop property, that balance had been $87,000. I went line by line. Withdrawals, transfers, debit card charges. Over the preceding 14 months, $85,588.94 had left that account. I sorted by payee. 41% went to a single payee, GMS Holdings LLC. I did not know what GMS Holdings LLC was. I wrote down the name. Then I found something else. I called First Regional Bank the next morning from the hospital parking lot. I identified myself as the account holder's daughter, with view-only access, and asked to speak with someone in the commercial accounts division. I asked whether GMS Holdings LLC held an account at their institution. The representative confirmed it did. I asked when it was opened. September 2021. The same month my mother mentioned Gary had reorganized her finances. I asked for the registered agent on the LLC filing. I did not need the bank to tell me. I pulled the Arkansas Secretary of State business entity search on my phone. GMS Holdings LLC. Registered agent, Gary Mitchell Sorrells. My brother. The almost correct flaw was in the invoices. I drove to my mother's house the next day while Gary was at work. I found a manila folder in the kitchen junk drawer labeled House Stuff. Inside were 11 invoices from a company called Pinnacle Home Solutions for work performed on the Darrow Lane property between October 2021 and January 2024. Roof repair, plumbing, electrical panel upgrade. Foundation inspection, HVAC replacement, total $129,400. Each invoice had a header, a description of services, a total, and a payment received stamp. Each one listed the contractor's license number in the footer. The license numbers were formatted correctly: 8 digits, hyphen, 2-letter suffix, exactly how Arkansas contractor licenses are formatted. Except the suffix was wrong. Arkansas uses a 2-letter code that indicates the contractor classification: RE for residential electrical, RP for residential plumbing, GC for general contractor. Every single invoice in that folder used the suffix GA. There is no GA classification in the Arkansas contractor licensing system. I know this because part of my catastrophe modeling work requires verifying contractor credentials after insured losses. I have read 6,000 contractor license numbers in my career. GA does not exist. I called the Arkansas Contractors Licensing Board. I gave them the license numbers from the invoices. None of them were registered. There was no entity called Pinnacle Home Solutions in their database. There never had been. Then I found something else. I pulled the property records for the Darrow Lane house. No permits had been filed for any of the work described in those invoices. No roof permit, no electrical permit, no HVAC permit. The $32,000 roof my mother told me about in April 2022, the one I contributed $8,000 toward, had never been installed. I drove to the house and looked up. Same shingles, same patched corner over the back porch that my father had fixed in 2001. I recognized the patch because I had handed him the tar paper. The 4-layer picture was now complete. Layer 1, my mother abandoned at a closed motel. Layer 2, $85,588 drained from her checking account to an LLC my brother owned. Layer 3, $129,400 in fabricated invoices for home repairs that were never performed, going back 31 months. Layer 4. My brother had created a fake contractor, issued fake invoices, funneled my mother's money, including the $8,000 I had sent for the roof, through his own LLC, and had been doing it since the month he gained access to her accounts. The $214,600 was not carelessness, it was architecture. The document I found that afternoon made everything before it irrelevant, not because it was worse, because it was first. In the bottom of the manila folder, beneath the invoices, I found a financial power of attorney, dated August 2021, 1 month before the LLC was created, 1 month before Gary was added to the checking account. The document granted Gary full financial authority over my mother's assets. It was signed by my mother. It was notarized by a notary named Linda Pruitt in Fort Smith. I looked at the signature. My mother signs her name, Vivian A. Sorrells, with a distinctive upward hook on the capital V and a compressed double L at the end. I had seen her signature on birthday cards, on my college financial aid paperwork, on my father's death certificate. The signature on the power of attorney had the upward hook on the V. It had the compressed double L, but the middle initial was wrong. My mother's middle name is Anne. The signature read Vivian A. Sorrells. The A was correct, but the slant of the A tilted 13 degrees left of my mother's natural slant. My mother is right-handed, and her capitals slant uniformly right at approximately 8 degrees. This A was written by someone left-handed, compensating for a right-hand style. Gary is left-handed. I photographed every document. I exported the bank records to PDF. I saved the Secretary of State filing. I saved the licensing board confirmation. I put the manila folder back exactly where I found it. 2 weeks later, I arranged a family meeting at my brother's house. He had bought a house on Ridgeview Terrace 18 months earlier, 4 bedrooms, new kitchen, paid in cash, according to the county assessor's office. He had renovated the living room himself and installed a built-in bookcase along the back wall with framed photos of our parents. He was proud of that room. He had posted it on social media twice. I arrived at 4 p.m. on a Saturday. My mother was there. Gary's wife, Sandra, was there. My cousin Paul, who had been helping Gary with Mom's yard work, was there. I sat down at the dining table and placed a folder in front of me. Gary said, "What's all this?" I said, 11 invoices from Pinnacle Home Solutions. He said, "Right. The contractors. What about them? I placed the first invoice on the table. This invoice lists contractor license number 4481970 for residential roof repair in October 2021. He said, "Okay." There is no GA classification in the Arkansas contractor licensing system. He blinked. Once. That's a typo. All 11 invoices have the same typo. Sandra leaned forward. Diane, I don't think this is the time or place for Pinnacle Home Solutions is not registered with the Arkansas Contractors Licensing Board. It has never been registered. Gary's face changed, not dramatically, a small tightening around the jaw. He said, I used a subcontractor. He might have filed under a different name. No permits were filed for any of the work described in these invoices. The roof was never replaced. I looked at it. The same shingles Dad patched in 2001 are still there. He stood up. You're doing this because you feel guilty. You left. I stayed. And now you're trying to make yourself feel better by tearing apart everything I've done for this family, Sandra said, quietly. Gary, just answer her questions. He turned to Sandra. Don't start. I placed the bank records on the table. $85,588.94 transferred from Mom's checking account to GMS Holdings LLC between January 2023 and February 2024. GMS Holdings LLC is registered to you. That account was for household expenses. Mom agreed to it. Mom did not know GMS Holdings existed. I asked her. She forgets things, you know that. I also have the financial power of attorney you filed in August 2021. He went quiet. The signature on that document has a left-hand slant on the middle initial. Mom is right-handed, you are left-handed. My mother was sitting at the end of the table. She had not spoken. She was looking at the invoices on the table the way you look at something you have never seen before. Gary said, after everything I have done for this family, after years, you sit here and accuse me of, I'm not accusing you of anything, I'm reading you the numbers. He pointed at me. No one is going to believe this. You've always been jealous. You've always wanted control. Paul, who had been silent, stood up and walked to the kitchen. He came back with his phone. He said, Gary, I need to say something. He held up his phone. 3 months ago, you asked me to drop off a check at the bank for your mom. I took a photo of the check because the amount seemed wrong. $12,000, made out to GMS Holdings. I didn't know what that was. I looked it up later. He set the phone on the table. I should have said something then. I'm saying it now. Paul, my cousin. The one who mowed my mother's lawn and never asked for $1. The one Gary had recruited to run errands, who had seen one check and quietly photographed it because something felt wrong. He had not come forward, he had not called me, but he had kept the photo. And when the evidence was on the table, he did not pretend he had not seen what he had seen. Gary looked at Paul with an expression I will remember for a long time, not anger, recognition. The recognition that the person he had trusted to be unobservant had been observing all along. I did not raise my voice. I looked at my brother and I said the only sentence I had planned. You built a company to invoice your own mother for work you never did, and you called it helping. I did not say anything else. I let the documents sit on the table in the room my brother had paid for with money he had taken from the woman sitting 6 feet away from him. The following Monday, I filed a report with the Fort Smith Police Department, Elder Financial Exploitation. I provided the complete evidence file. The detective assigned to the case told me 3 weeks later that they had referred it to the prosecuting attorney's office. The investigation took 4 months. In July 2024, Gary Mitchell Sorrells was charged with financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery in the first degree, and theft of property exceeding $25,000. In September, he entered a guilty plea to the financial exploitation and theft charges in exchange for the forgery charge being reduced. He was sentenced to 7 years, suspended to 3 years supervised probation, full restitution of $214,600, and forfeiture of the Ridgeview Terrace property, which was purchased with proceeds of the theft. The house went into foreclosure proceedings in October. Sandra filed for separation 11 days after the sentencing. She had sat through every hearing. She had not spoken to me once during the proceedings. 2 weeks after filing, she sent me a text message. It said, I saw things I should have questioned. I'm sorry I didn't. I read it. I did not respond for 3 days. When I did, I said, "Thank you for saying that." I did not say it was okay, because it was not okay. Paul came to see me in Little Rock in August, before the sentencing. He sat in my kitchen and said, "I should have called you the day I took that photo." I said, "You should have." He nodded. He did not make excuses, he said. I kept telling myself it was probably nothing, that Gary was Gary, and he had reasons. "I think I just didn't want it to be what it was," I said. "I understand that. I did the same thing for years." We sat with that for a while. I did not tell him it was fine. I told him the photo mattered. Because it did. My mother moved in with me in Little Rock in April 2024. I hired an elder care attorney to establish a proper conservatorship, with oversight and reporting requirements, and an independent auditor. I untangled her accounts. I restored what could be restored. The restitution payments would take years, but the accounts were hers again. In June, I filed a petition to have the financial power of attorney declared void. The court granted it in August. My mother's legal autonomy was restored under protective supervision, with me as conservator, and a court-appointed reviewer checking every quarter. Gary's contractor friends stopped returning his calls in July. His Facebook page, the one where he had posted photos of the Ridgeview Terrace living room, went dark in August. The built-in bookcase with the framed photos of our parents was sold with the house. I do not know who bought it. I do not think about it. My mother started a small garden on my back porch in May, tomatoes and basil, and one stubborn pepper plant that refused to fruit until September. She watered it every morning. She sometimes forgot she had already watered it and watered it again. That was fine. The point was not the tomatoes. The point was that she was deciding what to grow and where to put it, and nobody was managing that decision for her. I had postponed something for years, not a dream, something simpler. I had wanted to take my mother to the place where my father proposed to her. A diner in Eureka Springs that had been converted into a breakfast cafe. She had mentioned it every year on their anniversary, and every year Gary had said he would take her and had not, and I had been too far away and too busy modeling other people's losses to make the drive. In October 2024, I drove my mother to Eureka Springs. We ate pancakes at a table by the window. She remembered the diner. She pointed to the counter and said, "He was sitting right there, and he had mustard on his tie." She laughed. It was the first time I had heard her laugh without checking to see who was listening since before any of this started. I am sitting at my own desk now, in my own study. There is a document open on my screen. It is a restitution tracking spreadsheet I built to monitor Gary's payments against the $214,600 he owes our mother. The current balance received is $4,200. The remaining balance is $210,400. The number sits on my screen the way it sat in my mind the night I stood in that parking lot. But now it is a number I am watching go down, not up. It is a number that belongs to my mother, and every dollar that comes back is a dollar she gets to decide what to do with. That is the only math that matters now. I have spent 17 years reading damage reports. Every report follows the same structure: what happened, what broke, what it cost, what must be done. The hardest report I ever compiled was the one about my own family, and what I learned from it was not about the money. The money was just the unit of measurement. What I learned was that silence inside a system works the same way silence works inside a structure. It does not mean nothing is happening. It means the load is being carried by whoever is closest to the failure point, and no one is checking because the surface still looks intact. My mother carried that load. She carried it in house slippers on wet concrete in 41-degree rain. She carried it because the person she trusted to hold her up was the one applying the weight. Consequences are not revenge. They are what was always owed. I did not punish my brother. I read the numbers out loud in a room where the numbers could be heard. The numbers did the rest. They always do. When you watched it happen and stayed quiet, what were you protecting? Because it was not them. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, education, and dramatic reflection. We hope it reminded you that your dignity is not negotiable, and that setting a boundary, even a painful one, can be an act of love for yourself and everyone the pattern would have reached next.